The mention of divorce that we hear today from this 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, in which we find the Beatitudes, is actually sandwiched between two other far more basic issues. One, control of inappropriate bodily desires, and two, what we will hear in tomorrow's Gospel's continuation of this passage, a commitment to complete integrity and truth-telling. Certainly, if married couples followed these two basics Jesus provides in this section, there would be fewer, if any, divorces. Lust and lies are the grounds for the breakup of many a marriage. So that I might not steal the thunder of tomorrow's homilist, I want to focus primarily on the verses of the gospel we heard today. The famous first verse about a man committing adultery in one's heart by looking or gazing at a woman lustfully, unfortunately, has often been used to make the point that morality is not just concerned with what we do to one another, but with what we think, our spontaneous thoughts, fantasies, and those images that happen to pass through our heads. For some Catholics, quite sadly, this way of understanding what Jesus said has led them to almost obsessive concern with impure thoughts, confessing it over and over again. Jesus here, however, is really talking about behavior, about what people do. He is not speaking about some passing sexual thoughts, fantasies, or impulses. And the behavior of which he speaks, a lustful gaze, well, after reaching a certain age, we all know exactly what that behavior looks like. Under certain circumstances, it can make someone feel extremely uncomfortable. This is the type of behavior Jesus is telling us not to do, and very specifically about not doing this to a married woman. The translation we heard today, however, would better be translated without the word lust at all, and instead be read much more richly. Anyone who looks at a woman to covet her. When translated this way, we then hear clearly a violation of one of the 10 commandments, namely, not to covet thy neighbor's wife. Maybe you can begin to see now what Jesus is up to. Jesus is not talking about having us continually deal with and monitor our internal lustful or sexual thoughts, but wants us to address our covetousness. That is, our greedily wanting something, setting our desire on it, and acting accordingly if no other stronger reason presents itself to stop us. Now, following that other stronger reason that stops us in our tracks can ironically sometimes feel like one is tearing out one's eye or cutting off one's hand. So Jesus purposely uses these deliberate exaggerations to make a point. If you do not resist your covetousness, then best to go and tear and cut. Now, don't do that. This bit of hyperbole is one of the ways we are clearly shown that we are not to take the Bible literally. It needs interpretation, lest we have Christians going around lacking an eye or a hand. Instead, we must always take into consideration the many various factors influencing Jesus' words and teaching. We must, for instance, consider his culture. In Jesus' time, women were considered property. Jesus witnessed that a man could standardly have a kind of authority over a woman which a woman could never have over a man. There is no mention in Matthew's gospel of a woman looking lustfully, covetedly at a man. It just wouldn't have made sense to Jesus' hearers. So what Jesus is ultimately about here is once again undermining the unjust, unequal social institutions and structures of his time. Any wonder why he was put to death? Moreover, here in Matthew, unlike the Gospel of Mark, we have a very important parenthetical clause about divorce. It is translated here, unless the marriage is unlawful. But the Greek originally says, in the case of porneia, divorce is permitted. The problem? No one today knows exactly what that word meant in the time Matthew was writing his gospel. But what we see is that Matthew added some type of merciful exception for divorce not found in Mark. The early Christian community certainly had to come to understand and grapple with what Jesus meant by his teachings on divorce. Today, so do we. Pope Francis, in 2016, wrote a beautiful and challenging apostolic exhortation after the Synod on the Family called Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, where he explores for our time the heart and essence of Christian teaching on marriage and divorce. This important and long letter, I think, provides a way in which we might be hearing in our day the tiny whispering sound, the still small voice of God that the prophet Elijah heard on Mount Horeb. So let us listen to that small voice and not be embroiled in noisy, fiery, endless debates about what is and isn't allowed, or what should and shouldn't be allowed about divorce and remarriage, but focus first and foremost on what Jesus says earlier in this 5th Beatitude chapter of Matthew. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. May we focus primarily on just how to be that salt and light Jesus wants us to be today in our world and for our time.